All right, fantastic. So welcome to another episode of The Decision Room. Today I'm joined by Michelle Neal. She's the CEO of Fnality, a company building next generation payment systems designed to transform global financial market infrastructure. Michelle brings more than 2 decades of leadership experience across the Fed, BNY Mellon, and now fintech, with a career defined by making high stakes decisions in some of the world's most complex financial environments. Welcome, Michelle. Sorry about
Thank
that.
you. I was like, is that
Sorry about that.
that's all right?
Yeah, so welcome. Sorry about the interruption there, but thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me. I'm going to put my phones on silent. Actually, they are, so I'm all good.
I thought mine was, but I guess not. So anything, anything out of the gate you'd like to share about Fnality and maybe a little bit of how you arrived in the CEO seat there?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think that's a great place to start. You made a quick reference during the introduction, but maybe I can sort of just kind of double down on some of the kind of key facts about Fnality, given you might have quite a broad audience that don't necessarily are not necessarily immersed in wholesale payments, for example. But Fnality is building an institutional blockchain-based payment system to provide settlement for wholesale capital markets. And that's really within the context of meeting the highest regulatory standards in central bank money. So at its core, the innovation is delivering 24/7 real-time peer-to-peer settlement on chain with the credit characteristics of central bank money. What is important about that? A few things, really. Central bank money credit quality is really critical for wholesale payments for things like real-time balance sheet optimization and liquidity management. So no RWAs or risk-weighted asset gets assigned to the balances used to make payments in the system, reducing multiple types of risk like settlement risk, counterparty risk, replacement cost risk. Important for empowering institutional tokenized asset markets with an institutional grade means of payment on chain. So, for example, stable coins, there's a lot of sort of discussion and euphoria about stable coins, but they don't necessarily sort of work for kind of these type of wholesale transactions. So we're creating this global network of payment systems. In December 2023, we launched the Sterling Fnality payment system, which is in the UK. So we commenced operations as the world's first regulated DLT wholesale payment system, really settling in digital representation of funds held at the central bank. And then moving on from there, we are targeting expansion in other currencies. So we are prioritizing our efforts in the U.S., in Europe, and then sort of other major currencies in the world as we sort of build out our footprint. You asked me. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. No, maybe I was just going to ask a follow-up. We could get into your background in a second, but. So in terms of choosing that as sort of the go-to-market offering, I know the business has been around for a few years, but was that sort of always the plan, or was this an evolution, or kind of how did that come together?
Yeah, actually, very interestingly, Fnality isn't your typical kind of like founder-run startup fintech. Actually, my colleague and the prior CEO, Ramayas Ram, is essentially the founder in terms of running the company. But Fnality started as a research and development project from a consortium of banks that was originally known as Utility Settlement Coin, or the USC project. So they really set out to investigate how digital cash solutions could enhance efficiency in wholesale banking. They identified, say, 3 critical components for a transformative payment solution: availability across multiple currencies for seamless cross-border transactions, interoperability with distributed ledger and traditional finance systems. And again, coming back to kind of this assurance of central bank money creditworthiness to meet sort of high institutional standards. So in 2019, kind of Fnality's mission was to really establish this network of distributed financial market infrastructures. So that really sort of brought this real-time on-chain payment capabilities to global wholesale markets in the form of a company. So it kind of started as a project and a consortium of banks, and then became incorporated as a company. And we, have 20 of the world's largest financial institutions, FMIs, and asset managers as our shareholders. And we are in the process of actually adding to that roster of some of the world's biggest firms, sort of driving the operationalizing the platform across jurisdictions.
Got it. So as a CEO, sort of having to, I guess you'd say, answer to or represent the interests of that set of stakeholders, that's certainly an interesting role that maybe is a little different than some others might work with. So maybe you could share a little bit again about your background and maybe what you feel suits you well for this role, or why you decided to take this challenge on.
Yeah, it actually, it might not be for everybody, because you could imagine that you have, obviously everybody, anyone who's in a CEO position obviously has responsibility to their board and shareholders. But this is quite a unique. Consortiums are quite a unique kind of construct in which to operate, because you have lots of different stakeholders that may, basically reside in different jurisdictions, have different business priorities, might be insurgents in some markets and incumbents in other markets, and therefore, again, have different things that are important to them. So there's kind of a lot to manage in that overall kind of stakeholder landscape. But my original background really has always been what I would kind of call running businesses that are commercializing around either evolving market structure evolution or evolving regulatory change. So my original DNA was running businesses such as electronic trading in different asset classes, foreign exchange, fixed income like rates and credit products, listed derivative products. Over time, I became involved in and responsible for, really kind of working with the industry in a variety of consortium companies and projects. Arguably some of the largest and most well-known market structure consortiums in electronic trading, clearinghouses, exchanges, data companies. So I have experience as kind of a business leader and operator running businesses that have either a desire to have exposure to, involvement in, or in some way, taking a leadership stance around evolving market structure evolution by working with the industry, but also as a consortium member, board member, shareholder in kind of a number of key initiatives. So as you probably know, I come to Fnality having spent the 3 years prior as the head of the markets group for the New York Fed, which was really adding some public sector experience to my otherwise private sector career. And I always knew I wanted to come back to the private sector after I was able to kind of make that really important contribution from a public service standpoint. And, my prior background, what I'm passionate about, which is market structure and innovation, really kind of coming to, an important on the road to being a systemically important global FMI, really kind of suits both my experience, but also my passion. And when I learned about the opportunity to join Fnality as the successor CEO, it really kind of ticked a lot of boxes for me in terms of like an important mission, really kind of creating the next generation payment rails for the digital age, kind of really thinking about Fnality as kind of the backbone of an internet of money, and obviously global perspective. Relatively, this is a complex kind of business landscape with, banks and central banks and all the kind of considerations that kind of come with sort of working in that environment of stakeholders and, highly regulated activities and businesses, which is obviously, again, kind of part of my makeup and DNA and experience over a long period of time. So, it's certainly not falling short on delivering me all those challenges to contend. But it's a lot of fun.
So would you consider what you're doing like disruption or innovation, or just sort of kind of a natural evolution based on new technologies that have presented themselves?
I think that, the disruption element might be that you are, I think, positively disrupting, kind of lots of legacy traditional finance infrastructure to be able to kind of harness the power of blockchain technology, obviously in the case of Fnality, as it applies to global wholesale payments. So the really interesting thing about the disruption factor of Fnality is it's not causing a lot of times when you're involved in changes in market structure, innovation, and disruption, you're normally making the bet that you're kind of selling out one sort of business model to something that's coming next, and you don't necessarily know that's how that's going to turn out. Margins could compress. Your client base could change. Things become more self-service, and there's a disintermediation element to, what the innovation is. That's really not the case with Fnality. Fnality is really this enabler to facilitate the growth of tokenized assets. Because if you have a tokenized asset, you need a tokenized means of payment and settlement on chain. And so Fnality, obviously, at its core, facilitates that in this global network of payment systems. But when you think about a lot of the wholesale capital markets kind of business use cases that Fnality focuses on with our clients, delivery versus payment, payment versus payment, intraday repo, intraday foreign exchange, kind of global treasury optimization by, kind of managing kind of cash across, balance sheets more efficiently. That's all kind of net creating something as opposed to sort of disrupting something where there's like you're taking from one pocket to put in another pocket and hoping it all works out for the best. Some of those features I think don't really feature here, where it's really all additive and enabling sort of the market to advance.
So if you're successful, how does this impact stakeholders beyond your core consortium members?
Well, I mean, any really, the target addressable market for Fnality at this point of our journey is really any financial institution that holds a depository account with a central bank, right? So in the US, it would be, banks and credit unions that have master accounts with the Federal Reserve. In the UK, it would be, basically institutions that have reserve accounts with the Bank of England, right? So those are the kind of core participants that actually would be able to move money in and out of the Fnality payment systems for the purposes of actually making kind of payment on chain amongst its participants across different currency-based payment systems that obviously we're in the process of building out the footprint for. But that doesn't necessarily need to be just our shareholders, right? So that could be any institution that sort of meets those requirements. We also support the concept of sort of linked external providers that can use our programmable features to instruct payments to occur. So, for example, a centralized securities depository would be instructing settlement of a security transaction. And then as a result of that, the programmable side of the cash settlement would be able to happen based on the instruction from that linked external party. So it's really kind of an atomic settlement in that respect, where if the asset side of the settlement happens, the cash side of the settlement happens, like as a simplistic example.
Yep.
So there's lots of, I would say, infrastructures within the ecosystem that kind of can participate in that chain of of activity, and that obviously creates efficiencies for our shareholders that are clients, clients that are not shareholders, and their clients, because by freeing up balance sheet liquidity, and being able to become more efficient at managing things like kind of buffers and settlement risk, it just creates more capacity to provide more liquidity to the market, generally speaking. So as a result of that, sort of the benefits can be felt sort of pretty widely across the market and different types of market participants.
So I'm curious, because you mentioned this isn't your first experience, participating one way or another in a consortium model. So are there, in terms of sort of go-to-market strategy, are there any unique issues in terms of, do you want someone to be part of the consortium? Do you want them just to be a user? Are you competing against other sort of potential standards that other consortiums or other, private sector players are trying to get in place? Like, is it different than just a, normal kind of competitive go-to-market amongst, however they're funded, but more typically funded private sector companies?
I would say not really. I mean, we obviously have, very sort of important and key governance to how we sort of manage activities with and among, market participants that are, financial institutions, and it's pretty well known around, how, the importance of how they deal with each other in these settings. But a company that is by definition a network business, meaning you need a network of participants to make payments amongst each other, instruct different types of activity within the payment system environment. Effectively, there's transactions that lead to payments, and you need a network to grow to facilitate that business. So when you think about the best source of funding a business like Fnality, or any type of kind of network business that's sort of closely aligned to, franchise businesses of its clients, having your shareholders be sort of your anchor tenants and champions for growing the network is obviously sort of a really, I think, strong and compelling kind of mix of kind of like drivers and enablers. So I think in that respect, it takes time to build network businesses. We're operating in a highly regulated environment. We're working closely with central banks on the implementation of new paradigms. In some cases, like in the case of the UK, there was a new type of account structure that was created in order to sort of facilitate this type of payment model and settlement. So they're complex. They take time, and when your shareholders are strategic in nature, in a way, it does give you sort of room to kind of run these processes to the highest possible standard, given the time that they take. I think sometimes if you have a different type of shareholder composition that's maybe purely, financially orientated, you might have different pressures and different drivers. And so, there's definitely always a time where you sort of you kind of flip from one model to another. And But that from a network business that's highly dependent on market participants, that was really the right model for Fnality to establish its kind of core stakeholder base and become sort of operational in kind of key markets.
So you're relatively new in the seat, and just curious if you'd be willing to share a little bit about your approach in, coming into the role. Did you sort of already have a playbook from other times you've come into a leadership seat, or did you maybe take a little bit different approach in this case and think about it in terms of first 100 days, first 180 days, first year, like just kind of how you framed your approach to coming into the role?
I mean, you kind of learn with every experience that you have around what you want to, what mistakes you don't want to make again, things that you thought worked that might assimilate into kind of new situations and actually serve you well. I think I pride myself on being a good listener and sort of really trying to understand at a detailed level what is working, what are the challenges inherent in the business, and how I can empower people to be successful in their roles to fulfill the mission of the company. So, I would say that I've definitely spent a lot of time trying to do that. I definitely would say I combine that with having, a view on, what we need to achieve and what our parameters for doing that are. So I think, a combination of some fairly kind of like sort of top down important initiatives for the company, together with like looking at how we execute and where we can strengthen our ways of working to continue to do that as efficiently as possible, as impactful as possible towards our goals for the benefit of our shareholders in the market. I would say has been my genuine approach. I'm very much a proponent for leadership teams that feel a strong sense of mutual accountability to each other and really kind of focus on that common goal. So we've definitely done a lot of work. Fnality has a complex entity structure because it's really based on ensuring that local payment systems in any jurisdiction can be locally supervised and regulated by the central bank in that jurisdiction. And so there's really there's a whole set of kind of governance and ways of operating that go into that. And so, one of the keys for me has been really getting the best combination of getting the most out of that structure in terms of what it gives us by being able to sort of operate a federated network of payment systems, but also kind of having this kind of really mutually accountable, aligned management team, which is effectively kind of working towards kind of like the core goals of the company, which obviously requires us to work across all of our entities and payment systems. That has largely been my playbook and focus from arriving at the company. I mean, it's not a bank. It's not a central bank. It is a fintech company, but it's also it's a fintech company with a highly regulated context and mission. So there is a balance between being able to be agile and nimble as a fintech, but also have like a high degree of efficacy in operational resilience, risk management, and all of the things that go into running effectively, what will ultimately be systemically important market infrastructure.
Is there anything particularly challenging in sort of pushing innovation when you are dealing with a system built on that, high regulation and tradition? Like anything you've found in going in that you need to do in order to keep momentum, or do you guys have enough momentum at this point that it's more just about keeping the ball rolling, sort of?
I mean, it's continuous improvement, right? I mean, when I look at what Fnality has achieved over the last, 5 years before I arrived, I mean, it's really, I mean, it's the world's first regulated DLT, blockchain-based payment system for wholesale markets, right? And the bar to actually get to that point, and to launch its first payment system was really enormous. And so, but obviously the road ahead is arguably, you know, big as well, right? And federating across new jurisdictions, operating an ecosystem of payment systems that can support a cross-border payment environment. Being able to deliver, product and innovation, being able to sort of run 24/7 sort of payment operations across multiple jurisdictions, right? So there's a lot, like in the early stages of what we talked about early at Utility Settlement Coin, kind of like building the technology, kind of getting our rule books together, all of the things that kind of led up to the initial kind of launch of the first payment system. It had to be agile, but it had to be well planned out, and able to evidence and demonstrate kind of, again, the efficacy of the things that are important to doing that. But at the same time, now we have to keep doing that, but we have to do it in a way which is highly industrialized and operationally resilient. So I think I've heard a lot of people say that you often trade innovation and agility when you're operating in a regulated environment. And I don't actually think that's true. I think that you can be innovative, and I think that you can be agile, but I think that you have to have the core tenets of operational resilience, as basically how you do everything, right? There's like a first principles aspect of how you approach the business. It shouldn't compromise kind of innovation, thought leadership, being first. It shouldn't compromise those things if you actually sort of incorporate the things that make you strong and operationally resilient into everything that you do.
So one last quick question here, if you're okay on time. Is there a particular leadership lesson that you either live by or are bringing to this role, or maybe would share with others who aspire to top leadership positions?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, I think you always have to be willing to look at every situation and what lessons have come out of them. You kind of feed it into your future learnings. You course correct. I think as long as the context in which you're operating is underpinned by strong ethical standards and integrity, there's always room for failures. It's actually recognizing when you have to pivot, and when you have to say something's not working, and realize that that's not a failure in and of itself. It's kind of a success in and of itself to constantly be horizon scanning and looking at whether the context of which you made certain strategic decisions or plans still hold. And to the extent that something's changing in your external environment and your internal environment, how do you evolve and pivot? I think sometimes people think we made a plan, we got to stick with the plan, we got to deliver on the plan, but they're failing to kind of take into consideration externalities or other things that suggest that might need to tweak, or something that was originally conceived may not work because of something that's out of your control. So I would underpin that for almost anybody in any kind of leadership position, to train people to think about things in that way. And then I think more generally, I obviously subscribe to the fact that your role as a leader is really to serve others. You want to teach people how to lead in times of turbulence, stress. I have certainly operated in some of the most well-known crises that have ever occurred financial services, and I've learned so much as a result of being in those situations and looking how people that I was responsible for leading and taking and shaping my own view of how I want to lead in times of success and times of sort of challenge. But my core standards are high integrity, being reliable, being optimistic, open, transparent, resilient, and really kind of imparting those qualities on the people that work in my organization at all levels.
I think that's a great set of values and good recommendation. Michelle, anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up?
No, it was really a pleasure to have the opportunity to be in the decision room, and I look forward to keeping in touch. Maybe we do it again in a year from now and see how things are progressing across our plans and expansion, and just keep.
No, it's great stuff. It's definitely the world's getting smaller. Almost every business, regardless of size, has some cross-border component to it. So I think it's super interesting what you're doing, and kind of from a financial perspective, help more efficiently tie everyone together. So I wish you good luck in your efforts. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll leave you with one last thought. I was actually mentioning that to someone yesterday. You wouldn't believe how many people I come across time and time again. Someone that I work with in London, or I could be at an airport in Asia, or getting involved in, basically, bringing new shareholders into the organization, and people in institutions that we're talking to are people that I've worked with in other firms. The world's a very small place, whether it's fintech, financial services, the crossing the chasm of those two kind of spaces. It's very small, and so basically, taking pride and care about your, again, approach and integrity and how you treat people, is I think really important, because one thing that's for sure is you will run into people time and time again over the course of a long career, and I can tell you that's 100% true.
Yeah, no, it's true more than ever, 100%. So I know you've got some house guests there and some nice weather to enjoy before the summer's over. So I'm going to let you run here. But Michelle Neal, CEO of Fnality, thanks so much for joining me